So welcome everyone to our CHAOSS app ecosystem working group. It is May 4th, May the 4th be with you, 2020. Let's see, let me just share my screen real quick so that we're all on the same page. There we go. Okay, so we already filled in all the attendees and chat a little bit. Now we get to the meat of this meeting. Last week, 2 weeks ago, we did an amazing session. This is really gold's worth of what we created 2 weeks ago of goals and questions. And wow, I had forgotten how much work we actually did. This is amazing. This is really good material to start with. So let's see, on the process, we talked about goals and questions. So maybe we should go over that again. And then what we can do is, and this is just a proposal. If you have a different idea, we can do whatever we all agree on, is to then dive into the questions and figure out what metrics we want to have to inform that questions. That's how I see the next steps. And then in the future, we can actually talk about implementing those metrics and where we get the data from. So what are your thoughts?
We had so many different questions that, and I'm not sure if they're all grouped the way they should be. But it seems like too many to focus on. So I wonder if we should pick, the top 3 to initially work on or something like that.
Let's create a new document, copy these over, and then work in this new document. Share all. And I'm putting this here. There. Now, if you all go to the minutes, you should be able to go to our document.
Awesome.
So what I propose to do is spend the next, I don't know, 5 minutes or so to just go through the document, and we can do this individually, just to brush up our minds on what we actually did before and think about, is this logic? Are there deeper questions we need to be asking? Are there different ways to group these things, these questions and metrics? So if you could all come in this document, I'll also post in the chat for those who...
I might not be smart enough to use Zoom. When you started sharing, Zoom went full screen.
No worries, I can totally stop sharing. I don't want to block anyone's productivity.
I couldn't. There's got to be a way to unfull screen it when somebody's sharing. But
you can drag, I think, from the right corner on the left, so you can see a bigger, let's say, image of the persons involved.
Double click also sometimes works to undo full screen.
And hi everyone, by the way.
Hi.
Hey Neil, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, so let's dive into this document, and I'll mute myself. But if you have any thoughts, if you want to discuss anything, leave a comment in the doc or just speak up. So going through this list, I just had a thought that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to share my screen again. Going through this list, it reminded me of opensource.com article. Do you see opensource.com? How to measure the health of an open source community?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I never know with 3 screens whether I'm sharing the right one. So this one was written last year by John Lawrence, who was in the CHAOSS community. And he wrapped his head around the metrics we had by writing this blog post where he said, okay, there are different roles. So he had like project founders and then project maintainers. And for each of them, he wrote down, okay, what is the question? And then he said, okay, for each of those, what metric would they be looking at? So I was just thinking that what we are building here, the only part we are missing right now is who are the roles that have these goals, that care about these questions. So maybe we can use this, if this makes sense to you, as a template to move forward, if this makes sense for you, or we can just do something completely different.
Yeah, I think this makes sense. I think we touched on this at the last meeting. Let me see okay, you have project founders, and then scroll slowly. Let me see the roles that are on here. Oh, I guess more quickly.
That's also maintainer, if I remember the next one.
Is that maintainers?
Yep.
And then what's that? Developers? Okay. I think where we might be a little different is looking at these kind of multi-project projects where you have maintainers of individual pieces. And those people might have different goals, or I mean, not radically different goals, but different pieces of the pie that they care about than, say, the people who are doing release management across the entirety of the project. Just a thought. But yeah, I like this. I always, as a technical writer, I always like having like a defined audiences of who you're targeting, right? Who's your persona that you're going for? So I like that a lot.
Okay, so at the top of the document that we're working in, I wrote down roles that are focused on more than one project. I think there was more in what you were saying that I didn't capture.
I think the issue is in our communities, and I guess it's similar in NOM, is that we have an umbrella organization that hosts many projects underneath. And there are people handling things on the higher level, let's say, and which might or might not be involved in the daily things that people are doing in their singular projects across the community. And at the same time, there are the maintainers, who are the people that are actively working on their projects. And sometimes, let's say, opinions between how to handle things or what would interest you to know about the community or the people involved might be different. I think this is what Sean was trying to explain. So this is, of course, like maybe a bit particular to communities like NOM and KDE, which are very big umbrella organizations, and not to other projects like, I don't know, VLC, which is a huge community, but it does more or less one thing.
Well, the nice thing is we're completely focusing about KDE and GNOME here in our conversation. So let's not worry about everyone else. So what are the roles at the umbrella organization that worries about metrics?
I guess, please, Sean.
Okay, sorry. I just want to say, if we start by focusing on the ecosystem-wide concern, we see the umbrella that coordinates and harmonizes the projects that belong to these ecosystems. However, some projects have cross-project components. because we usually see like one project is doing something that, let's say project A is has a roadmap that produces an output that project B consumes. Would both of them have to really work together? They have different consents, quite all right, but they need to work together. Some other projects are really like a kind of interdependent. They work in the ecosystem, but they don't really strongly depend on other projects to build out some artifacts. So once we have this ecosystem-wide concern, like the bigger umbrella, we see now this other, how they administer or coordinate activities of these individual projects and cross projects, which of course these individual projects have their own roadmaps that must align to the universal agenda of the ecosystem. So if, for example, this ecosystem is making, let's say, producing an artifact on a regular interval, or let's say a release that, let's say, maybe follows a 1 year, 6 months, or 9 months, all of these projects will fit in, but within this period of time, individual projects may still do their internal releases, let's say 3 months, minor updates and things like that. But the bigger organization oversees how every structure fits together. So if we are looking into those who are at the managerial level, at the higher level of coordinating things, we may not really be seeing about maintenance at that level upfront. But when we go now to the implementation, how it is really achieved, now we start looking into new contributors, those type of metrics that will capture a project. Because I also saw like one of the concerns on onboarding, which is an important component for an ecosystem. When we onboard new members, we onboard them into the ecosystem, then based on their individual skills, they can now go into the projects of interest, but they need to know how the ecosystem functions and how things are connected. So the onboarding really takes care of that, bringing in people and feeding them in with experts, or I saw something like heroes or heroines within the community. They are like keystone players that helps to strengthen the younger people to grow up. Well, that's just a few contributions I have for now.
Yeah, to me, and sorry, I was also kind of multitasking during the beginning part of that, but what I heard was just like this huge thing about newcomers and new contributors and kind of retaining them and really making sure that they understand where to go. And we have a lot of that as part of our goals. So I think that what you mentioned is definitely in our interest to measure. So
going back to like roles that I could think of in the umbrella, let's say, organization that come to mind are that would be interested like into the like how is the community doing. One is, I guess, the promo team, like things handling communications and things like that. Another is probably the financial team, people doing finance, sponsoring people, looking to see who's coming to events, who's not, and all things like that. And another one would probably be community managers, like people who are dealing within the community, responsible for programs, specific programs, or specific goals like onboarding that Armstrong mentioned, which is a big aspect of most communities. So I guess that's what I think, those that come to mind like immediately.
yeah. Georg, we don't have edit access. Not sure if that's something you'd like us to have.
Can you just refresh your browser page, because it's set to anyone with the link can edit?
Yep, that was it. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. So Armstrong, you said a lot of, sorry, Sean.
No, go ahead and talk and I'm going to type.
I just wanted to see if there was anything from what Armstrong said that we can use to improve this document or write down? Because there was a lot of really good information, and I was not, I couldn't type that fast or organize the thoughts that fast.
You want me to like list to state some of them again, or how? What do you want? I don't understand.
I always like to produce outcomes from meetings. So is there anything from what you said that we should consider in this document that we're working on?
Well, I think all of us are on the same track. I was just like saying, if we see the umbrella organizations like the coordinator, like coordinating the individual, because that aspect of coordination is really important for an ecosystem, especially when we have projects and cross-projects dimension. We can, even though we are focusing on a particular ecosystem that I have not really looked into it personally, but I know component like most of the other ecosystems where this coordination is a huge issue, especially when cross-project component comes into it. Then now we start, because we have already mentioned a lot of them, then how do we onboard people? As we said, this umbrella, like you guys already suggested, the onboarding is there, but we need to do it in such a way that the onboarding people should first of all capture the essence of this ecosystem. Then they go to project specifics. Because the reason sometimes is that some project, like some ecosystem might have let's say two projects. One can be building an application using, for example, JavaScript. Another project can be working on C or any other language. They don't have the same paradigms. Now, if there is no sufficient coordination or laid down rules by the ecosystem, things will really go messy. Because these projects are interdependent, by the way. So this onboarding comes in now to give these dynamics of the new people, how to really, because they are already like the people building the health dimension of an ecosystem. They learn the best practices, how to communicate, like we already mentioned, and things like that. So these experts from the ecosystem, both the hero and heroines, they are the one tasked transferring these skills to these younger people.
Okay, so we have heroines, I don't even know how to spell that, as a type of role in the umbrella organization.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand that term. What I thought that part of this was saying is that if you're part of a foundation, you're trying to ensure that the projects under your umbrella are thriving. And so you need to measure the effectiveness of the initiatives that you're doing to ensure that. So there's like obviously measuring the health of that community, but it's almost like measuring the coordination work that you're doing, or like the initiatives at the higher foundation level, like the impact of those. Was that part of it? Because if not, I think that that's still good to measure.
Yeah, because actually the health of an organization is a complex dimension. So we need to break it down into these other smaller components to really understand what the health is. Once the projects are healthy, the ecosystem is healthy.
Yeah. Okay, I see that. And in that, I liken that to, you know, the GNOME Foundation. You know, there's the GNOME, GNOME is made out of lots of different projects. But yeah, like how are the efforts that the foundation itself are doing, like what's the impact there? So I don't think it's necessarily event organizers. It's more of like that, like top level, I don't know how you would call it, but I guess you already have it, coordinators.
Yeah, because some have like the technical council or the technical people up there who are like the foundation, but they have they are not really events organizers, but they are like technical committee members, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It could be boards or if there's a foundation.
Various working groups also come to mind.
Yeah, working groups also work, special interest groups, most of these kind of groups, depending on the interest and the focus.
Our list is growing.
I still
That's
didn't
really
understand the heroines. Isn't that the same thing as the community managers bit? Could we collapse those, or are those two separate things?
Yeah, I say we could merge them.
Okay. So maybe we'll just remove this. And then event organizers.
Yeah, I wrote that. Yeah, because I thought that there are people that might be interested, but also many times they fall into the other categories as well, like community working groups or community managers, financial teams. So yeah, I wrote that with a question mark for brainstorming mostly.
Yeah, that financial is very important, especially when ecosystems are organizing events like summits, like conferences and things like that. That kind of things really plays a lot, because even with the best technical skills, if you don't have people who actually plans events and manages the finance, it becomes a fiasco.
Yep.
So Sean, you've been trying to speak up a few times.
Oh, no, I mean, the first thing I wrote in there, something that had come to mind when we were talking about people at the umbrella level of release managers, fairly technical position of knowing when, when you've got a project that's composed of 100 sub-projects, which ones of them, maybe need some people to jump in and help, because sometimes the sub-projects, some of them decline. So watching that. And the only thing that occurred to me that is maybe just throwing it into the more goals that we thought of last time. You were talking about onboarding programs and measuring the success of those. And I think that there's a lot of metrics that could go into the success of an onboarding. But one of them that I think we haven't captured is retention length. Like, if you're running programs like Summer of Code, Outreachy, Season of Docs, whatever, like, you might successfully bring someone in, and then how long do they stick around as a community member? And those might be kind of event specific, or I don't know. It's something that I've faced before as a mentor of these kinds of programs. Like, was it worth my mentoring time if I only, got this much out of it versus, a new community member?
Those are excellent questions. Did you already add them?
No, I added the bit about the release manager, and the other one is not well formed enough in my brain to write a sentence. Sorry.
Okay.
Where would I add that? I mean, trying to think of if that fits under one of these categories down at the bottom.
Is this the whole thing about like mentors or like mentorship?
Do we have a thing in there about mentors?
No.
About mentor
But that
programs?
could be a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, right there. Okay.
Well, let's add a new goal.
Okay. Yeah, I like mentor as a persona there.
So Sean, I added here a question. How long do people stay engaged in the community after leaving a mentorship engagement?
Yeah, I think that's measurable with the right measuring tools, and it's a very interesting number.
And my prediction is that it's usually much lower than we want to think. like
Yeah.
at least to my experience.
Yeah. But I would tell you that you know,
That
for me
means there's area
personally,
for improvement, right?
yeah.
Sorry.
For me personally, it was, you know, I continued doing Google Summer of Code because I felt like that number was decent. I didn't have real measurements. It was my gut feeling. But I stopped doing the Google Code-In, that used to be called Highly Open Participation Program, because my gut feeling, again, no real metrics, but my gut feeling was that I didn't get retention out of contributors, and that makes it not worth my while. So having real numbers on that is, I mean, I've made real decisions based on fake numbers. So.
So you're saying like the retention rate was lower than some threshold that you were expecting?
Yeah, and you know, it was an arbitrary, I didn't set a real threshold, but it was basically people who came in on the code in my experience, and others have different experiences, but basically they did their project that they got money for, and they all disappeared after that. Like nobody, I got zero retention after paid projects.
Well, that's interesting to know, because I'm doing also a research on onboarding, and most of the things you guys mentioned here so far really makes sense to me and to what is happening in reality in the field. Since we are looking into an ecosystem, sometimes we cannot use one use case to generalize, but most often, once the key players are not really, like the stakeholders are not involved, retentions really become a problem. Because these students, why they go into this Google Summer of Code, most of them sometimes go in for exposure and for them for to get into this thing, but it is not really like their key areas. They want that exposure, but once they get there, if they don't have solid mentorship or mentoring that really drive them to their career goals, they have better opportunities. They remain inside an ecosystem though, but not necessarily on the project they were working on. Because like one of my findings that I came up with is that some companies do not sponsor events like onboarding, but they end up like hiring all these mentees that were mentored by other organizations. And I call that a kind of brain drain within an ecosystem. So they were actually doing brain draining. So yeah, this is the kind of thing. They are not really like abandoning in the sense that they just stop contributing, but they migrate to some other focus areas within the ecosystem or any other ecosystem project. So how to retain them in the project that they were working on, even if they move from hire to volunteer. It depends on how onboarding handled their use cases. So onboarding to me should really have a vast dimension. I remember speaking with some key players when we were asking them, also interview them about abandoning. And some of them in those top companies said the biggest strategy that ever happened to them, they saw sometimes the key players started abandoning because the organizations did not really pay attention to their needs. They have been complaining, but people took it for granted. But when one or two of them left, it was a shock to the community. So the lesson learned is that they started understanding when key organisms like key players raise an issue, they should give a listening ear. Because sometimes they just focus on productivity. So those kind of things can also result to abandoning, which is another way of looking at retention. Because when we talk about retention, we should also see, okay, people are retained, but do they also abandon after a while? What are this abandoning rate? Anyway, that can be a different topic on its own.
Yeah, we already have one that's talking about retained contributors a little bit further down in the document. So I think that ties into the question of how do mentorship programs specifically work.
And I think one thing that Armstrong opened the door up for is this other question I added up here about what do mentees do after a mentorship ends, and not just look at our community, but open source as a whole.
Yeah.
And then maybe even employment that they get after they end. And so that also changes their focus and attention. Just an understanding that can maybe be valuable to evaluate the effectiveness and value of our mentorship programs.
Hi all, I'm Vinod. Georg and Armstrong knows me, but this is my first meeting in this group. So I'll just introduce, I'm a PhD student at University of Nebraska, Omaha, working with Dr. Matt and Kevin over there, and I used to work with Georg also. I'm trying to understand, this is my first meeting, so like in the second section under umbrella organization, you're trying to look from the perspective of that umbrella organization or the individual projects working in that. For me, umbrella organization can be like Linux Foundation or Genome, which is a platform that hosts many apps or individual projects. So if that is the scenario, then how mentor or like that umbrella organization is mentoring the individual projects from that perspective you're trying to look, or I'm trying to understand the dynamics. So am I right in that sense? Like, is the umbrella organization trying to mentor the different individual projects, or?
So it's not necessarily that, but we run, at least at GNOME, we opt into Google Summer of Code every year in Outreachy. Okay. And sometimes there's like money that the foundation has to put in order to participate in Outreachy, for example. So that's, I think, the type of mentorship we're mostly talking about. But then there's like those specific programs, but then communities might also have other mentorship programs that are more at the community level. And I think that, again, at least at GNOME, sometimes ideas bubble up at the board level. And then, you know, we've started to hire specific staff positions to run those types of programs. So I think understanding how important mentorship is and kind of the rewards, as Armstrong was saying, you know, really helps decide how much money we should invest in establishing programs like this.
Okay, got it. I was like trying to head around and understand the like dynamics of this group.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because I've worked more on a dependency area of the ecosystem, like how different projects are dependent on the code bases from another project to another project in a different steps. That's where I've worked a lot, and I've seen like there are projects which are like highly dependent. There are some which are like once in a while used, so a mix of that.
Actually, going through the list earlier, when we were going through the list, we had the time, I realized that based on what you are saying, if I'm pronouncing it right, sorry. Yeah. I noticed that we have some inward, let's say, community goals and some outward. So some of it some of the goals are about looking inside our community, and some of the other goals you will notice if you go further down the text are about exactly looking at other organizations and other communities and how there are interdependencies between organizations and communities and things like that. So okay. At least in my mind, we do have like this high level split, let's say, between the goals we listed.
Yep, got it.
Okay, I added your note, Neo, that we have some goals looking into the community and some goals looking outside at other organizations and communities.
Okay, thanks.
I'm just always trying to capture everything that is of value in our conversation. Okay, so we've talked about the roles in app ecosystems that we want to create metrics for, and we clarified that we're not so much interested at the individual projects or maintainers or developer levels. We are much more interested in the umbrella organization of the app ecosystems. The ones that do promotion, communication, that do finances, community managers, release managers, coordinators across projects, whether that is individual people or working groups or what was the other name? Working groups or
Steering
special
committees?
interest groups, steering
Oh,
committees. Yeah. Event organizers or activity organizers, and also mentors. So that is really helpful to frame the conversation. Now, I have an eye on the clock. One thing that we started doing in CHAOSS meetings is to end 10 minutes early to give everyone time before their next meeting. And so we have 5 minutes left if we also decide to do this here in our call.
I wish more meetings did this, actually.
Is there, so let me ask you all this. Is there anything on your minds right now that you think, let's just capture this so I don't forget before next meeting?
I have one thing to share, just going through the entire document and looking. So what I felt is like you are trying to capture at a macro level to see at a glance, like from a bird's eye view, that what is happening within your community, if that is correct. So one of the thing I was trying to think from those terms was like looking from a graphical perspective, how my community is interconnected within this like bigger picture. For example, is like how these individual projects within my ecosystem are interconnected with each other. How can I capture that from a bigger picture, like from a genome perspective, to see how various projects under my umbrella are interconnected. That was one thought I had to think for me, was like how I can see that health of this entire ecosystem from an interconnectivity perspective.
Yeah, I think we'll get to that when we talk about the metrics and what are sensible ways to visualize the metrics that we're looking at. And network diagrams or visualizations that graphically show the network can be really valuable. And at that point, depending on what the metrics are, we can have, you know, what are nodes, what are edges? Are they the people? Are they the repositories? Are they the communication channels? Well, we'll have to talk about those kinds of things, what visualizations do make sense, and we have many options here. Or like what you were looking at, we note with what code bases rely on other code bases. And that might also be an interesting graphical depiction.
Yeah, and that seems to touch on what Armstrong had mentioned earlier too, of how really it helps to understand all the different dependencies and how it all works together. So thanks for jotting that down.
Okay, well, unless there's anything else, we can close the meeting.
Cool.
Any last thoughts?
Nope.
Happy.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much. This is progress. And sometimes progress looks slow, but I know you've all been in open source long enough to know that as long as we keep at it, make a little progress, we'll eventually arrive at our goal.
Definitely. Thank you.
Sure thing.
See you guys.
Thank
you.
you.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone. And thank you, Armstrong. And didn't have a chance to thank Vinod also for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for running it, Georg. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.